Hello. This is about questions I have. So come along with me, and I think when I'm done, you'll have some questions also. As a lawyer, one of the first skill sets I had to learn was the art of asking questions. You have to learn how to ask questions. You can't take for granted something somebody says. If somebody tells you something, you need to wonder if they have a motive for shading the truth. And so you need to learn to ask questions. So I learned very early in my career that questions was an essential part of my job, asking questions. So I've learned, of course, we should all know this, but just because somebody says something doesn't make it true. You need to question their motives. You need to question the background, their expertise, maybe their eyesight, maybe their understanding. There's just a whole host of things that you might want to go into and question a witness about. And as a lawyer, you learn that you need to do that with your clients as well. I remember years ago, I lost a case, and I lost it because I did not ask my client one question. I assumed, based on all our conversations, based on all the other questions that I'd ask him, I just assumed a certain fact. And that fact was deadly. And the other attorney on the other side asked my client this question. And my client apparently didn't realize how significant it was. And when he answered it the other way, I was stunned. Never in my wildest imaginations would I have dreamed that he would answer the question that way. I'd have to go into great detail, but it was just totally illogical that he would even bring a lawsuit based on the answer that he gave. Everything he said earlier and gave to me, assumed this one little fact. Well, suffice it to say, the case was lost right there. So I learned an important lesson. Do not take anything for granted. I've learned that experts are pretty good at distorting the truth. They'll even lie. I've learned experts, they have turned disguising the truth into an art form. You don't believe that? Just look at what the tobacco company did, Big Tobacco, years ago. They put out expert opinions on their product on a regular basis, peer-reviewed opinions. Translate peer-reviewed as paid-for opinions. So anybody can buy an opinion, and just because an expert says something, I need to hear it from more experts. I need to hear all sides of the discussion before I make my mind up. Don't give me one, especially one that's associated with a particular industry. And in this case, Big Pharma. If Big Pharma has an expert or somebody like, I'm questioning them. I read a book, it's been 5 or 6, 7 years ago now. It was a very interesting book about a lot of things. But one of the things that it did was it showed how a lot of the executive level people from Big Pharma matriculated up into high level government positions, FDA, CDC. They worked their way up, and lawyers, a lot of different people. So Big Pharma's got some very heavy hitters on their side in our government. And so that's part of the reason my questions here. Years ago, I had a case, a federal civil rights case. And so myself and another lawyer, it was a big corporation, 5 lawyers, 4, 5, 6 paralegals, and just me, the other lawyer, a couple secretaries, and our poor client, and they had, of course, all the money, the deep pockets. Our client could barely afford, a single deposition, let alone the dozen or so they wanted to take. And so we made a discovery request in there. There were some documents that we wanted. So imagine our surprise when we were told to meet the lawyer at a warehouse. So we drove over to the warehouse, we go in, and basically he pointed over there in one corner, and there were these dozens of boxes stacked up, and he said, well, there's the response. Just copy them and go through them, and when you're done, make sure you put them back, blah, blah, blah. I can laugh about it now. They knew we weren't going to do that. They knew we were incapable of doing that. They buried these documents that we wanted in several thousand, tens of thousands of other documents, knowing that we didn't have the staff or the resources to comb through all that stuff. So eventually we got what we wanted. It's another story in and of itself. And we ultimately won the case. But suffice it to say, by doing that, they led us to some conclusions. Here's our conclusions. 1, they had something to hide. 2, that something was something that would hurt them. And 3, they didn't want us to know what was contained in those documents. So they buried them in the middle of a bunch of other documents, tens of thousands of documents. Pretty devious. And that leads to this. I have a lot of questions about the vaccine, and a lot of other people do too. I don't have many answers, just questions. And I can't advise you because I don't know the answers. That's why the questions are being raised. You ought to be raising these questions as well. Now, there's some that purport to know the answer, but if all you're hearing is one side, if you go to a trial and all you hear is the plaintiff's side of the case, and the defendant doesn't have the opportunity to get up and tell his or her side, what do you have? You've got to have both sides. If you want the truth, that's why our trial system is so good. It really does have a way of getting at the truth. It's not perfect, doesn't always result in getting at the truth, but it's an adversarial system where both sides get to tell their story. You have a constitutional right. If you're a defendant, the government or law enforcement comes and arrests you, you have certain constitutional rights. One of those is to confront the witnesses against you, to question their story, to question their witness, to question what they see or said they saw or heard. You have a right to cross-examine them. And that leads us to get to the truth. So we have a lot of data that's thrown at us by the CDC, the FDA, and doctors everywhere, Big Pharma. We have a lot of data. We have a lot of facts that are thrown at us, but we also have a lot of data that's coming from other sources that are good sources, that are sources that are credentialed. They're not just, goofballs out there on the web. They're somebody that you can take seriously. And they're saying things that are different. And so, that raises the flags for me, and I say, well, who's right? So the only way you find out who's right is you let there be an open debate. You let there be some tests. You have times where you can ask questions and they can ask questions, and you get into the issues and you find out, what's what. So here's the questions that I have. First of all, why didn't Pfizer tell us all about the side effects of the vaccine? These thousands of documents that have been turned over to the government. And the, 1,200 some side effects that they're discussing out there. If you go and Google and DuckDuck, you'll see all the side effects. And you ask, well, how important are these side effects? How important was it for us to know? Are they linked to the vaccine? Now, Pfizer is saying they aren't. Pfizer is saying that in all of these cases, there's an underlying problem, issue, medical issue. But how do we know that? I don't know about you, but I'm unwilling to take their word for it. I want to hear from other experts to see if that's so. But if they bury the answers to this, and they bury the data to this, how are we going to know? So why didn't they tell us about all these side effects early on? Why did it take a court order? Now, the CDC says this about side effects. So here we are at the CDC, Centers for Disease Control. And this is a government site, federal government. And we see here possible side effects. So what do they say? Well, they say common side effects. They list 3 items here: pain, redness, swelling. And then the rest of the body, they give you like 6 things, all minor stuff. Then they say severe allergic reactions. They're pretty rare. And then they get a place here about getting a different vaccine after an allergic reaction. This is what they tell you about side effects. So, do you see anything on this site that would raise your concerns about this vaccine? I don't. Most of you don't and wouldn't. So this is an interesting site. The Lawyers for Justice site discusses this release of the Pfizer documents. And there's a lot of good info if you're interested in the release. Discusses about how in February there was 10,000 documents released. In March or from February. Anyway, about 400,000 or so are going to be released. So this FOIA request was made by the Public Health and Medical Professionals for Transparency in America. And interestingly, the group is composed of medical and public health professionals and scientists from Harvard, Yale, and other institutions. They made it in August of 2021. They looked for about 400,000 documents. And here's the interesting thing. The FDA ignored the FOIA request. So they had to go to court. When they went to court, the FDA requested that it only be done at 500 pages a month. Effectively, this would have taken 75 years. So that raises a huge question in my mind. I don't know if it does yours or not, but I'm saying, why? Why are they not willing to do this without a court order, regardless of the public interest issues? That just doesn't make sense, unless you got something to hide. They're right. It raises an immediate red flag, an immediate red flag. And then the released documents, heavily redacted, raise another red flag. And they say flat out right here, the vaccines use a technology never before administered to a human population on a mass scale and were rushed out under a EUA authorization. It was an emergency authorization. And this is still in trial, yet millions of people are getting it. Millions. So anyway, the judge rejected the FDA proposal and basically said, no, you're going to get it out, and here's your schedule. So if you go through the article, and the URL is up here, and I'll put it in the description below. But it's pretty interesting. I would suggest you read it. It'll raise a lot of questions for you, as it did for me. A lot of questions. Down here near the end. This was disingenuously presented as a humane action. The reality being that not only were the clinical trials as to safety and efficacy prior to the FDA conditional authorization hugely compromised. Yeah. Do you have any questions? You know, I'm not a dummy. I'm a pretty smart guy, you know. And I'm reading documents from people a lot smarter than me. They have questions. We all have questions, and they're not being answered. They're not being answered. And that leads me to question, why? And in looking into this and raising these questions in my mind, I came across a curious link. But it doesn't work. Why doesn't this link work? Just thought I'd throw that out there. So here's my questions. I know I've asked questions before that, but here's the substantive questions, the main questions I have. One, why did it take a court order to get the U.S. government to release the vaccine-related documents produced by the drug company under a Freedom of Information Act request? So the request was made and it was ignored. Why did they have to go to court to get the court to order it? And then when the court got involved, it raises another question. Why did the U.S. government want to get the court to allow them, get this, 75 years to release these documents? Oh, and they only wanted to release them at 500 pages a month. Oh, 400,000 documents, 500 pages a month. Give me a break. I don't know about you, but red flags went up in my brain immediately. Why the heavy redaction of the documents that have been released. I'm not talking about little heavily redacted. Now, redaction is basically just where black ink is drawn over a sentence or a paragraph or a word so that you can't know what's there. And you're not given a reason as to why, basically not a reason. They may give a legal reason, but it's not the real reason. It's not something you can understand. They won't tell you, for example, we didn't release this to you because this has to do with a formula that is secret. They won't even tell you that. Next question is, what is buried in those 400,000 pages? Which springs forward another question. What are they hiding and why? So here's my conclusion. Somebody has something to hide. That something was something that would hurt them, whoever them really is. And they do not want me or you to know what was contained in those documents. By the way, I don't know who them and they are, but I know it's a whole lot of people, more than we probably know or could even possibly imagine. And I think that some of them are very high level. I think some of them are in government, some of them are in industry. They don't want you and I to know these things. Final note. I'm not a corporate lawyer, but I understand that the only reason that these side effects and documents are really available is because if they were not disclosed, they could be sued by a shareholder. Now, you and I can't sue them. They are virtually immune to you and I. I'm going to do another video later on that immunity and some thoughts I have about it and how they might be vulnerable. They wouldn't necessarily be vulnerable to you and I, but I think they could be vulnerable to states in a certain way. But that'll be in a later video. But they could be sued by a shareholder, interestingly enough, I think. Again, not a corporate lawyer. So hopefully I've raised some questions in your mind. Thanks for listening.